Well, everybody knows that one of my absolute favorite players on the Atlanta Falcons is Chris Lindstrom. And if we go back a couple few months ago, whatever like that, when I talked about this season and what it's going to take to change up the culture of the offense and what has to happen, we talked about the fact that they have to have much, much better offensive line play. And we gave you the grade. Remember, we gave you the grades about where Hennessy, where Mayfield, where McGarry all ranked among pass blocking offensive linemen in the entirety of the NFL. And we went through and they had 3 of the 9 worst pass blocking offensive linemen in the NFL. And we said, okay, well, one is they're going to run the football a lot more. Let's see if those guys can be better. And then obviously we got some changes. I said, you cannot start Jalen Mayfield and Matt Hennessy together again. That combination can never start again for this team, or it's going to be another disaster. So one of the people that we knew would be fine in this whole thing is their best offensive lineman, Chris Lindstrom. Now, last year, if you remember, Lindstrom didn't give up a sack. Now, I will say he's completely regressed and he's a bum now. He gave up a sack. So he's been credited with giving up 1 sack. He only has 1 penalty on the season. I think he had 4 maybe last year. Maybe it was less than that. But again, not many penalties. And obviously, he came in as one of the highest graded offensive linemen in the league at his position. So this season so far in the first 3 games, when you look at the top 5 highest graded offensive players, Saints, Rams, Seahawks, he's finished number 1 against the Saints, number 2 against Seattle last week, because Patterson got a 90 grade, which is an elite level grade. And then he was not in the top 5 in week 2 against the Rams. So in 2 of the 3 weeks, he's either been the number 1 or number 2 highest graded offensive player that they have on the roster. For the season, Chris Lindstrom with his 80.2 grade, 80.2 is his grade. That's the 3rd highest Pro Football Focus grade of any guard in the entirety of the NFL. So we love to chastise and criticize and critique many of the draft picks that the Falcons have had. Certainly McGarry is one of those guys that, it's up, down, and one week not bad, the next week, and does some things that make you scratch your head and probably won't be an Atlanta Falcon next year. But one guy who's going to get his contract extension and be here for the long term and he'll play on his 5th-year option next year is Chris Lindstrom. He's been an outstanding find for this football team. And we talk about the idea of changing philosophy and this, that, and the other. Well, it really hasn't mattered with Chris Lindstrom, whether he's been having to pass block, whether he's had to run block. It hasn't mattered that much to Chris Lindstrom. He's been the one bedrock on your offensive line. And why that is so important, let's talk about the center position for just a minute. Remember when I told you before, long as we were into summer and training camp, that no matter what happened at center, I always believed that it's the Spider-Man meme at center, right? The 2 Spider-Mans that point at one another because they're the same guy, right? You're me, you're you, I'm you, you're me. Okay, that's Hennessy and Dahlman. Of the 44 qualified centers in the NFL with a Pro Football Focus grade, Dahlman is 40th right now. Let me repeat that. Of the 44 qualified centers in the NFL, Dahlman is 40th in the league. Now think about that. Think about how many teams that there are. Last I looked, could be wrong. Maybe the league's expanded in the last 10 minutes. There aren't 40 teams in the league. So he's the 40th graded center as it is. Even more reason why it's been so important, the job that Lindstrom and Wilkinson and even Gossett has done in stabilizing this offensive line. I'm watching Dahlman, by the way, too. He's got to fix his snapping. And that's one of the things that's starting to also become concerning is he already had a snap that went into Pitts that was, about a turnover. And then you're watching Mariota. He's like having to bend down like he's a shortstop to field the ball. At least we're not quite at Mike Person, James Stone level of, remember that back in whatever that was, maybe 14, 15, or maybe 17. But when those 2 guys were playing center and Matt literally had to play with a shortstop glove on his hand, he had to play with a baseball mitt on his hand to field the ball coming off the turf because it was bouncing off the turf at him in shotgun. We're not quite at that level yet, but this relays the importance of how important it is to get your offensive line fixed. Because Dolman right now is not good, but Lindstrom is terrific. And in pro football focus terms, for those that are not familiar, okay, a 1 week grade of 80 is good, but it doesn't mean life changing or anything like that. But if you have 17 games and you average out to an 80 or above in the league, you're one of the top players. You may not be the elite of the elite, but again, right now there's only 2 guards in the league that grade out higher than what Chris Lindstrom does. But 80 puts you into that upper tier of top guards. And if Lindstrom plays like this for the whole year, he'll be a Pro Bowler this year. There won't be much doubt about it. He probably could have made a case last year that he should have been in the Pro Bowl. The fact that he only gave up whatever it was, 3 or 4 penalties, and he had no sacks that were credited to him. Should have probably been a Pro Bowl last year. But if he plays like this year, I think he's going to get look at the Pro Bowl. Whatever the Pro Bowl becomes, by the way, that's a whole other thing. It's going to be flag football. It's going to be whatever, throwing darts or, hand grenades, or I don't even know what at this point the Pro Bowl ridiculousness is going to be. So separate topic for another day, out there. But Lindstrom has been that bedrock on the offensive line. And while you still have issues at center, and while you still have some questions about what McGarry is or is not going to be this year, and I do expect, by the way, I know Myles Garrett had the car wreck, but he's out of the hospital. He was swerving to avoid an animal. His car did flip multiple times, but he's okay. He's out of the hospital. He's recovering. I do expect him to play on Sunday. And I expect him and Clowney are going to line up on Sunday, and it's going to be a handful for Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry. But at least you know, and at least you feel like you've got one of those bedrocks on your offensive line. At least you feel good about you're going to try to run it between the tackles. We can go right behind that guy, right? We can run right behind Lindstrom, and he's going to get it done for us. So I know my buddy Hugh Douglas likes to joke about, Lindstrom is just a guy, or he's the best of the worst, or whatever like that. No, Lindstrom's a high-level player. Lindstrom is a high-caliber, high-level player. You can't dumb your way into being one of the top 3 guards graded out in the league. You can't dumb your way into an 80 grade if you play a whole season at that level. You can't just kind of luck your way into that, because you're bound to have a mistake here, a mistake there, and especially when you've got guys that are, in the middle and on the outside of you that aren't so good. So the interior guards for Falcons this year, Wilkinson's been really good. Gossett did a good job last week. We know Lindstrom is outstanding. And we talked about, if you're going to change up your offense and you're going to have success and you want to run the football better, everything about this offense had to start with improvements on the offensive line. And Lindstrom is taking that next step forward. He's going to get the big money contract. I think he's on track to be a Pro Bowler this season. Everything that you would want to see about Lindstrom as he heads toward his 5th year on his rookie contract is all arrow pointed upward. The offensive line is arrow pointed upward, right? And Elijah Wilkinson, believe it or not, as crazy as it sounds, he's been a pleasant surprise. It reminds you that Jalen Mayfield, we may talk about him later in the week, reminds you how bad Jalen Mayfield was. And it also gives you, a little bit of wiping the sweat off your brow as to how good Lindstrom was. Because if that draft had not worked out, if McGarry and Lindstrom had played the same as what we've gotten, you'd be having to put some high capital into your offensive line. So let's show a little love to Lindstrom. He's the number 3 graded out guard in the entirety of the NFL. All right, well, thank you so much for making Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery your first listen every day. Make ATL Day 1s your second listen every day. My friends Jarvis Davis, Tanitra Batiste, talking about all things in the heart of the city of Atlanta. Want you to head to youtube.com, put Locked On Sports Atlanta in the search browser, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment. We are free and available on all of your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify and Odyssey. Download us for free. Leave us a 5-star review. Find us, by the way, Roku and Amazon Fire. Yes, we are on those platforms. Check us out there, and then give me a follow at JMCH316. We'll be back for a Hump Day edition. This has been Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.